The morning sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows of Cedar Falls Methodist Church, painting rainbow fragments across the white pine floor. Annabeth Whitlow stood at the altar in her mother's wedding dress, the ivory silk yellowed with age but still elegant against her fair skin. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the small bouquet of prairie roses and baby's breath, their sweet fragrance mixing with the scent of beeswax candles and old hymnals. The church was packed, every pew filled with the good people of Cedar Falls, dressed in their Sunday finest. Women fanned themselves with gloved hands despite the October chill, while men tugged at starched collars. In the front row, Annabeth's parents sat rigid as fence posts. Her father, Judge Theodore Whitlow, his gray beard meticulously trimmed, and her mother, Constance, whose tight smile never quite reached her eyes. Reverend Michael Hartley stood before her, his young face earnest and clean-shaven, holding the worn leather Bible that had blessed countless unions in this frontier town. At 28, Michael was considered quite the catch, educated back east, devoted to his calling, with gentle manners that made the unmarried ladies of Cedar Falls flutter their fans a bit faster during his sermons. Annabeth had thought herself fortunate, after the accident 5 years ago, when her horse had spooked at a rattlesnake and thrown her against the canyon rocks. She'd feared no man would want her. The months of recovery, the hushed conversations between her mother and Dr. Morrison, the knowing looks from the town's gossips, she'd endured it all. But Michael had courted her with patience and propriety, never asking about the accident, never pressing for details about her injuries. "Dearly beloved," Michael began, his voice carrying across the congregation, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses." The familiar words washed over Annabeth as she studied Michael's face. Something was wrong. His jaw was clenched, and a muscle twitched near his left eye. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning. To join this man and this woman in holy matrimony, which is an honorable estate, instituted by God. Michael's voice faltered. He closed the Bible with a snap that echoed through the sanctuary like a gunshot. The congregation shifted uneasily, whispers rustling through the pews like wind through wheat. "I cannot," Michael said, his voice strangling on the words. "I cannot in good conscience proceed with this ceremony." Annabeth's bouquet slipped from her numb fingers, roses scattering across the altar steps. "Michael?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He turned to face the congregation, his hands gripping the pulpit. "I have learned something that makes this union impossible, Miss Whitlow." He paused, swallowing hard. "Miss Whitlow cannot bear children. She has deceived me, deceived all of us, hiding the extent of her injuries from that accident." The church erupted. Women gasped behind their hands. Men shifted uncomfortably. Annabeth heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, felt the weight of 100 stares boring into her back. "That's not... I never lied," Annabeth managed, her voice stronger now, fueled by indignation. "You never asked..." "A lie of omission is still a lie." Michael's composure cracked, revealing something ugly beneath his ministerial calm. "A wife's sacred duty is to bear children, to be fruitful and multiply. You would have me live a barren life, condemned to watch other men's sons grow while my own name dies with me?" Judge Whitlow rose from his pew, his face purple with rage, though whether at his daughter or the Reverend, none could say. "Reverend Hartley, surely this is a matter for private discussion." "No!" Michael slammed his hand on the pulpit. "I will not be trapped in a fraudulent marriage. Let all of Cedar Falls know the truth. Annabeth Whitlow is damaged goods, unfit for the sacred role of wife and mother." The words hit Annabeth like physical blows. She stood frozen as Michael stormed down the aisle, his footsteps sharp against the floorboards. The congregation parted before him like the Red Sea, some reaching out in sympathy or scandal, others pulling back as if her condition might be contagious. For a moment, silence held the church in its grip. Then the whispers began, building like a flash flood in a dry canyon. Always suspected something wasn't right about that accident. Poor Judge Whitlow, the shame of it. No wonder she waited so long to marry. Damaged goods, indeed. Annabeth turned slowly to face her parents. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes, staring instead at his hands folded over his walking stick. But her mother rose, her face a mask of cold fury. "You knew," Constance hissed, low enough that only Annabeth could hear. "You knew, and you let us arrange this marriage. Let us send out invitations. Let us be humiliated before the entire town. Mother, I thought—" "Don't!" Constance's slap caught Annabeth across the cheek, the crack of it silencing the whispers. "You are no daughter of mine. You've brought shame upon the Whitlow name that will take generations to erase." The judge finally stood, taking his wife's arm. "We'll send your things to the hotel," he said, his voice flat and final. "Don't attempt to return home." They swept out, leaving Annabeth alone at the altar in her mother's wedding dress, surrounded by scattered roses and the weight of her disgrace, one by one. The congregation filed out, some pausing to stare, others hurrying past as if afraid to be associated with her shame. Only old Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry, stopped beside her. The Chinese woman pressed something into Annabeth's palm, a small leather pouch. "For your journey," she whispered in accented English. "Sometimes, Missy, only way forward is to leave all behind." Then she too was gone, leaving Annabeth alone in the empty church with nothing but shadows and shattered dreams. The walk to the hotel was the longest of Annabeth's life. News traveled fast in Cedar Falls, and it seemed every window had a face pressed against it. Every doorway held a cluster of gossipers. She held her head high, the wedding dress dragging in the dusty street, the train torn and muddy. The hotel clerk, a pimpled boy named Tommy, whom she'd known since he was in short pants, couldn't meet her eyes as he handed her the key. Your things are already in the room. Miss Whitlow, your father paid for 3 nights. 3 nights. After 23 years, she had 3 nights to plan the rest of her life. The room was small and sparse, a narrow bed with a thin quilt, a washstand with a cracked mirror, a single chair by the window. Her trunk sat in the corner, hastily packed. When she opened it, she found her plainest dresses, her riding clothes, and precious little else. No jewelry, no books, none of the small treasures that made a life. But tucked beneath her chemise was a rolled parchment, the deed to her grandmother's old mare, buttermilk, and a bill of sale for the saddle. At least they'd left her transportation out of town. Annabeth sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears to come. She wept for the children she'd never bear, for the parents who'd discarded her like spoiled meat, for the future she'd imagined as a minister's wife, but most of all, she wept for the girl she'd been before that day 5 years ago. The girl who'd raced her horse through the canyons without fear, who dreamed of love and laughter and a house full of children. By the time her tears dried, the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood and roses. Annabeth rose, steadied herself, and began to plan. Mrs. Chen's pouch held more money than she'd expected, enough, combined with her small savings, to buy supplies and head where? West. The answer came unbidden but certain. West, where the railroads were pushing through, where towns sprouted overnight, where a woman might remake herself without the weight of history, where the name Whitlow meant nothing and the state of her womb was nobody's business but her own. She spent the night preparing. Her wedding dress she left hanging in the wardrobe. Let the next occupant make of it what they would. She dressed in a riding skirt and boots, packed her few belongings into saddlebags, and wrote 3 letters. The first, to her parents. She tore up. The second, to Michael. She burned. The third, to Mrs. Chen, contained only 2 words. Thank you. At dawn, Annabeth slipped out of the hotel and made her way to the livery stable. Buttermilk nickered softly in greeting, the gentle mare nuzzling her hand for the sugar cube Annabeth always carried. She was an older horse, past her prime but steady and sure-footed, overlooked by most, but perfect for a woman who needed to disappear. Old Sam, the stable hand, helped her saddle up without asking questions. He'd probably heard all about yesterday's scandal, but he had the grace not to mention it. As she mounted, he handed her a canvas-wrapped bundle. "Trail food," he muttered. "Jerky, hardtack, dried apples. Got a full canteen, too. Desert's no place for a woman alone, but I reckon you got your reasons." Annabeth's throat tightened. "Thank you, Sam." "You take care, Miss Annabeth. And if anyone asks, I ain't seen you." She rode out as the town was waking, past the church where her life had shattered, past her parents' house with its windows still shuttered, past the schoolhouse where she'd once imagined teaching her own children their letters. A few early risers saw her, but none called out. None tried to stop her. She was already a ghost to them, a cautionary tale for young women. The desert welcomed her with its vast indifference, mile after mile of sage and sand, punctuated by towering mesas and ancient cottonwoods clustered around rare springs. Annabeth had ridden these trails before, but never alone, never without the promise of home waiting at the end. By midday, the October sun was fierce despite the season. She stopped to rest Buttermilk in the shade of a massive red rock formation, sharing water from the canteen and chewing tasteless jerky. The silence was profound. No church bells, no gossip, no judgment, just the whisper of wind and the distant cry of a hawk. She made good time the first day, following the old Spanish trail toward the Colorado River. Her plan was loose: reach a railroad town, perhaps find work as a seamstress or shopkeeper, build a quiet life where nobody knew her shame. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all she had. As darkness fell, she made camp in a sheltered canyon, building a small fire the way her father had taught her on their hunting trips, back when he'd still claimed her as his daughter. The stars emerged one by one, a glittering tapestry unmarred by town lights or smoke. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, answered by its pack. The sound should have frightened her, but instead she found it oddly comforting. They too were outcasts, surviving on the margins. The second day dawned clear and cold. Frost silvered the sage, and Buttermilk's breath steamed in the crisp air. Annabeth broke camp efficiently, erasing traces of her presence out of habit. The trail wound through increasingly broken country, red rock canyons and dry washes that could become death traps in flash floods. It was near noon when she realized she'd taken a wrong turn. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by a maze of similar-looking canyons. She backtracked, but each twist and turn looked the same. The sun beat down mercilessly, and her water was running low. "Don't panic," she told herself. "Think." But the desert offered no answers, only endless rock and sand and the growing certainty that she was thoroughly lost. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, carrying with it a wall of red dust that blocked out the sun. A sandstorm, rare for October but not impossible. Annabeth dismounted, leading Buttermilk into the dubious shelter of an overhang. She tied her spare shirt over the mare's eyes and wrapped her own face in her shawl. But the sand found every gap, filling her mouth and nose with grit. The storm raged for hours. When it finally passed, the world had been remade. Familiar trails were buried, new dunes blocked old passages. Worse, Buttermilk was limping, favoring her left front leg. Not serious, but enough to slow them down. Water. They needed water. Annabeth led the mare slowly through the transformed landscape, searching for any sign of springs or seeps. The sun was setting again, painting the rocks blood red. When she spotted green, a small cluster of cottonwoods that promised water, she hurried forward, hope rising. But the trees surrounded only a dry depression, the spring long dead. Her canteen held perhaps 3 swallows. Her throat burned with thirst. "This is how I die," she thought with bitter clarity. Not in childbirth like a proper woman, but alone in the desert, as barren as my womb. The thought gave her strange comfort. At least there would be no more shame, no more pitying looks, no more. Buttermilk's warning whinny snapped her from her reverie. A figure on horseback emerged from the canyon shadows. moving with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. As it drew closer, Annabeth could make out details. A man, lean and weathered, dressed in worn leather and furs despite the heat. His horse was a rangy gray Mustang, the kind the Indians favored, with wild eyes and scars marking its hide. The rider stopped 20 feet away, studying her with eyes the color of winter ash. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against skin burned dark by years of sun. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched with the patience of a predator deciding if she was threat or prey. Annabeth straightened, trying to project strength she didn't feel. "I'm lost," she said, her voice cracking on the words. "My horse is lame. I need water." Still he said nothing, those gray eyes taking in every detail, her torn dress, her blistered hands, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Then he dismounted in one smooth motion, approaching with silent steps. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35, with harsh features softened only by an unexpected gentleness in the way he handled her mare. He ran expert hands over Buttermilk's leg, found the stone lodged in her hoof, and removed it with a knife that appeared and disappeared so quickly Annabeth barely saw it. Then he pulled a water skin from his saddle and held it out to her. She drank greedily. The warm, leather-tainted water the sweetest thing she'd ever tasted. When she tried to return it, he shook his head and gestured for her to water the mare as well. "Thank you," she whispered. He studied her for another long moment, then spoke, his voice rough with disuse. "Storm's coming, worse than today. You ride with me or you die here." It wasn't a question. Annabeth looked at this strange, scarred man who'd appeared like a spirit from the rocks, then at the darkening sky where clouds massed like an army. She thought of her parents, of Michael, of all the proper people of Cedar Falls who would be scandalized at the thought of her riding off with a stranger. "I'll ride," she said. He nodded once, then helped her mount Buttermilk with surprising gentleness. As he swung onto his own horse, Annabeth caught sight of something that made her breath catch, a sheriff's badge, tarnished and bent, hanging from his saddle horn like a trophy or a reminder. They rode in silence as darkness fell. Winding through canyons she could never have navigated alone. The promised storm hit just as they reached a narrow cleft in the rocks. He led her through twisting passages barely wide enough for the horses, up a steep trail that had her clinging to the saddle horn, until finally they emerged onto a hidden ledge. A dwelling crouched against the cliff face, part cave, part rough construction of logs and stones. Smoke rose from a hole in the roof, promising warmth and shelter. He dismounted and began unsaddling the horses with practiced efficiency. "Inside," he said, the second word he'd spoken to her. "Fire's ready." Annabeth stumbled through the low doorway into blessed warmth. The space was larger than it appeared from outside, furnished with rough practicality, a stone fire pit, shelves carved from the rock holding supplies, furs piled in one corner for bedding. It smelled of smoke and leather and something wild she couldn't name. She sank down beside the fire, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. Through blurring vision, she watched him enter with their gear, watched him heat something in a battered pot, watched him hold out a cup of broth that tasted of sage and rabbit. "Sleep," he said, pointing to the furs. "Safe here." And because she had no choice, because her body was failing and her mind was fogged with fatigue, Annabeth Whitlow, discarded daughter, rejected bride, barren woman, curled up in a stranger's bed in a cave at the edge of the world and let darkness take her. Her last coherent thought was that she didn't even know his name. Annabeth woke to unfamiliar sounds, the crackle of a fire, the distant cry of an eagle, the whisper of wind through rock. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The wedding, the humiliation, the desert, the silent stranger who'd saved her life. She sat up slowly, muscles protesting. Pale morning light filtered through the dwelling's entrance, revealing details she'd been too exhausted to notice the night before. The walls were decorated with Indian pottery and woven baskets. A rifle hung on pegs near the door, along with traps and tools worn smooth with use. Everything spoke of long habitation, of a life lived in careful solitude. The man sat cross-legged by the fire, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. In daylight, she could see him more clearly. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord. The scar she'd noticed before was more prominent now, a pale river across weathered terrain. His hands moved with economy, each gesture deliberate and sure. "There's coffee," he said without looking up. "Food, too." Annabeth found a battered pot warming by the fire. The coffee black as sin and strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and it cleared the fog from her mind. Beside it sat a pan of cornbread and dried meat. She ate slowly, aware of his peripheral attention despite his focus on the rifle. "Thank you," she said finally, "for saving me, for—" She gestured vaguely at the shelter. "The food. Everything." He looked up then, those gray eyes unreadable. "Luke Rollins," he said, as if that explained everything. Annabeth Whitlow. The name felt strange on her tongue, as if it belonged to someone else now. "From Cedar Falls." Something flickered across his face. Recognition? Disdain? But he merely nodded and returned to his rifle. The silence stretched between them. Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Annabeth finished her meager breakfast and ventured outside. The dwelling perched on a natural shelf of rock, hidden from below by an overhang and a screen of juniper. The view took her breath away. Miles of canyon country spread before her, layer upon layer of red rock carved by wind and ancient waters. Far below, she could see the green ribbon of a creek winding through the canyon floor. "Canyon of Wild Kisses," Luke said behind her, making her jump. She hadn't heard him approach. "That's what the Mexicans called it. The Indians have an older name, but it means something similar." "It's beautiful," Annabeth said. "Savage, but beautiful." "Savage keeps people away." He moved past her to check on the horses. Corralled in a natural pocket of rock, Buttermilk nickered in greeting, looking no worse for their ordeal. Annabeth watched him work, noting the careful way he checked each animal, the gentle hands that belied his harsh appearance. "You were a lawman," she said, remembering the badge. His hands stilled for a moment. "Was. And now? Now I track." He straightened, fixing her with that penetrating stare. "Sometimes for the army, sometimes for ranchers who lose stock, sometimes for people who need finding." A pause. "Or who need not to be found." The implications hung between them. Annabeth wondered which category she fell into. "I can pay," she said quickly. "Not much, but—" "Don't want your money." He turned back to the horses. "Storm will last another day, maybe two, then you can go." "Go where?" The question must have shown on her face because he added, "Railroad camp at Bitter Creek, 3 days' ride. They always need cooks, laundresses, women willing to work. Women willing to work, not wives, not mothers. Just women with strong backs and no questions asked." It should have stung, but instead Annabeth felt oddly liberated. "Yes," she said, "that would do." The day passed in strange domesticity. While Luke tended to mysterious tasks, checking trap lines, maintaining weapons, studying maps marked with symbols she couldn't read, Annabeth found herself falling into the rhythms of frontier housekeeping. She swept the packed earth floor with a bundle of sage, organized the meager supplies, even attempted to wash some clothes in a bucket of precious water. "Don't need doing," Luke said when he found her scrubbing his spare shirt. "I need to be useful," she replied, not looking up. "I can't just sit." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded. "There's mending, if you're handy with a needle." She was. Her mother had insisted on perfect stitches, straight seams, invisible darning, skills for a proper wife. Annabeth pushed the bitter thought away and lost herself in the simple task of repairing tears in leather and cloth, making something whole from something damaged. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Luke showed her around their temporary domain. The spring that fed the canyon emerged from the rock face in a natural basin. clear and cold. A storage cave held smoked meat, dried beans, cornmeal, supplies enough for weeks. Everything was organized with military precision, ready for quick departure or long siege. "You're prepared for anything," she observed. "Have to be." He knelt by the spring, filling canteens. Man makes enemies in this life. Some deserved, some not. "Which were yours?" He glanced at her, surprised by the direct question. "Both." That night, as they sat by the fire eating a simple meal of beans and rabbit, Annabeth found herself studying him. The scar, she noticed, wasn't the only one. His hands bore the marks of violence, knife cuts, what might have been a bullet graze, yet he handled the coffee pot with delicate care, served her food with unexpected courtesy. "Why help me?" she asked suddenly. Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Saw you from the ridge. City woman, good horse, riding like you knew where you were going. But you didn't. Could see it in how you sat the saddle, back too straight, hands too tight. Fear does that." "I wasn't afraid," she protested. "Not of the desert, of what you were leaving." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Know that kind of running. Did it myself once." The opening was there if she wanted it. She could ask about his past, about the badge, about what had driven him to this isolated existence. But something in his manner warned her off. Instead, she said, "I wasn't running. I was choosing." "Same thing, sometimes." They lapsed into silence. But it was more comfortable now. The fire crackled. Wind sang through the rocks. And somewhere in the distance, coyotes began their evening chorus. Annabeth found herself relaxing for the first time since that awful moment in the church. "I can't have children," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "That's why I'm here. My betrothed discovered it and denounced me before the whole town. My parents cast me out. I am, in the words of Reverend Michael Hartley, damaged goods." She expected shock, disgust, perhaps the same rejection she'd faced before. Instead, Luke merely nodded. "Knew a woman once. Apache, couldn't bear children. Her people honored her as a holy woman. Said the spirits had other plans for her strength. That's different." "Is it?" He looked at her directly. "White folks think a woman's only good for breeding. Indians know better. Know there's more than one way to give life." Tears pricked Annabeth's eyes. It was the first kind thing anyone had said about her condition. "You're not what I expected from a tracker. You're not what I expected from a lady." She laughed, surprising them both. "I'm not a lady anymore. Ladies don't ride alone into the desert. Ladies don't sleep in caves with strange men. Ladies don't—" She broke off, overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. "Ladies don't survive." Luke finished quietly. "You did." That night, Annabeth lay on her bed of furs, listening to the night sounds of the canyon. Luke had given her the warmest spot, closest to the fire, while he bedded down near the entrance, close enough for propriety's sake, far enough for honor. She could hear his breathing, steady and deep, and found it oddly comforting. She thought about Bitter Creek, about becoming a laundress or cook, about building a life among other forgotten women. It wasn't the future she'd imagined, but it was a future nonetheless, and that was more than she'd had yesterday. The second day brought new challenges. The storm Luke had predicted arrived in full force, not sand this time, but rain. It came in sheets, turning the canyon floor into a raging river, making travel impossible. They were truly trapped now. Two strangers bound by circumstance and stone. Luke seemed unperturbed. He went about his routine, checking weapons, studying his maps, working leather with patient hands. But Annabeth grew restless. She'd never been one for idleness, and the enforced proximity made her aware of things she'd rather not notice. The grace in his movements, the way firelight played across his features, the gentle way he spoke to the horses. "Teach me," she said impulsively as he cleaned his rifle for the third time. He looked up, eyebrow raised. "To shoot, to track, to survive." She met his gaze steadily. "If I'm going to live out here, I need to know how." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. City women don't usually want to learn such things. I'm not a city woman anymore. He considered this, then nodded. All right. He started with the rifle, breaking it down piece by piece, explaining each component's function. His hands guided hers as she learned to load and clean, to sight and hold steady. He was a patient teacher, correcting without condescension, praising small victories. You've done this before, he observed as she managed a decent grouping on a target he'd set up. My father taught me to shoot birds. Before she became a disappointment. Before she ceased to be his daughter. He said I had a good eye. He was right. Luke took the rifle, demonstrating a different grip. But birds are different from men. Men shoot back. The lesson shifted then, from sport to survival. He taught her to use cover, to move quietly, to watch for sign in the afternoon, when the rain let up briefly. He took her into the canyon, showing her how to read tracks in mud, how to find water by watching birds, how to tell direction without a compass. Why are you doing this? She asked as they crouched by a set of deer prints. You asked. That's not an answer. He was quiet for a moment, studying the tracks with unnecessary intensity. Maybe because someone should have taught my sister these things, before it was too late. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Annabeth wanted to ask more, but sensed this was all he would offer. Instead, she said, I'm sorry. Long time ago. He stood, closing the subject. Storm's worsening. We should get back. That evening, as rain pounded the rock overhead and firelight danced on the walls, Luke surprised her by pulling out a worn book, Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Wouldn't have figured you for a reader. She said, Man gets lonely. Books help. He handed it to her. You can borrow it if you like. She opened it carefully, finding margin notes in a feminine hand. His sister's? She didn't ask, just began to read aloud, her voice mixing with the rain and fire to create a strange intimacy. Luke listened, his eyes half closed, tension gradually leaving his shoulders. They passed the evening this way, lost in tales of knights and honor and impossible loves. When her voice grew hoarse, Luke made tea from some desert plant, honey-sweet and soothing. Their fingers brushed as he handed her the cup, and neither pulled away as quickly as they should have. Tomorrow, he said as she closed the book, I'll teach you to set snares, shoot rabbits. A woman should know how to feed herself. And after that, if the weather clears, Bitter Creek. The words should have been welcome. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? A new start, a place where nobody knew her shame. But something had shifted in these 2 days, something she didn't want to examine too closely. Yes, she said. Of course, Bitter Creek. But as she lay in her furs that night, listening to the rain and Luke's breathing, she wondered why the thought of leaving made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously like loss. The rain stopped on the 4th day, leaving the canyon washed clean and gleaming in the morning sun. Annabeth stood at the edge of their shelf, watching the swollen creek below gradually return to normal. She should have been eager to leave, to start her new life in Bitter Creek. Instead, she found herself memorizing every detail of this strange sanctuary. The way morning light caught the red rock walls, the smell of sage and juniper after rain, the sound of horses nickering in their stone corral. Not today, Luke said behind her, making her jump as usual. The man moved like smoke. Ground's too soft. Horses would mire in the wash. Tomorrow, maybe day after. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by guilt. What was wrong with her? This was temporary, had always been temporary. Luke Rollins was a stranger who'd shown her kindness. Nothing more. Then I suppose you're stuck with me a bit longer, she said, aiming for lightness. Suppose so. He moved past her, carrying his rifle and possibles bag. Coming. Where? Hunting. You wanted to learn? They spent the morning stalking through the wet canyons. Luke taught her to move heel to toe, to place her feet where his had been, to freeze at his hand signal. He showed her how rabbits like to hide in the thorn brush, how to spot the subtle movement that betrayed their presence. When she finally managed to shoot one, a clean kill through the heart, he nodded approval. Good shot. Now comes the real work. He taught her to skin and clean the rabbit with swift, efficient strokes, wasting nothing. It was messy work, but Annabeth found she didn't mind. There was something honest about it, something real. In Cedar Falls, meat had come from the butcher, wrapped in brown paper, its origins politely ignored. Here, life and death were intimately connected. My mother would faint if she saw me now, she said, elbow deep in her task. Your mother's not here. No. She looked up at him, struck by the simple truth of it. She's not? They made camp by the creek for lunch, roasting strips of rabbit over a small fire. Luke showed her which plants were edible. Prickly pear pads once the spines were removed. Pinon nuts from the twisted pines. The tender hearts of agave. The desert, she learned, was generous to those who knew its secrets. How long have you lived here? She asked, licking rabbit grease from her fingers in a way that would have horrified her finishing school teachers. 5 winters. He stared into the fire, calculating. Maybe 6. Alone? Mostly. She wanted to ask about the badge, about his sister, about what had driven him to this solitary existence, but she'd learned that Luke gave information like the desert gave water, rarely and only when necessary. Instead, she said, it's peaceful here. He looked at her sharply. Most find it lonely. Lonely is sitting in a parlor full of people who see you as damaged goods. This, she gestured at the canyon walls, the endless sky. This is just solitude. There's a difference. Something in his expression softened. Yes, there is. That afternoon, he showed her his maps, not just the official ones, but his own hand-drawn charts marking water sources, game trails, hidden camps. His fingers traced routes through the maze of canyons, teaching her to read the land's grammar. Here, he said, pointing to a symbol she didn't recognize. Apache winter camp. They move through every December. Peaceful, mostly, long as you don't surprise them. You trade with them? Sometimes, their women make the best baskets, watertight, if done right. He indicated several baskets around the shelter, traded tobacco and bullets for those. Annabeth studied the intricate patterns, the tight weaves that could hold liquid. They're beautiful, functional and beautiful. Best things usually are. Their eyes met across the map, and something electric passed between them. Luke looked away first, rolling up the charts with careful hands. That evening, Annabeth offered to cook, using skills her mother had insisted she'd learned for running a proper household. But here, with limited ingredients and primitive tools, those lessons took on new meaning. She made a stew of rabbit, wild onions, and some roots Luke had gathered, seasoned with sage and salt. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling and flavorful. This is good, Luke said, and she could tell he meant it. Been a while since anyone cooked for me. Don't you go to town for supplies? Once, maybe twice a year, stay long enough to trade pelts, buy what I can't make or find. His jaw tightened. Don't like towns much. After dinner, she read more of Ivanhoe while he worked on repairing a saddle. The domestic scene should have felt strange. A proper lady would never be alone with a man like this. But propriety had abandoned her in that church, and she found she didn't miss its weight. The next day brought a problem. Annabeth woke to find buttermilk favoring her leg again, the old injury aggravated by their hard travel. Luke examined the mare with gentle hands, his face grave. Needs rest, real rest, not just a day or two. He straightened. Could leave her here, take my spare mount to Bitter Creek, come back for her when she's healed. Leave buttermilk? The mare had been her grandmother's, the only thing of value her parents had allowed her to keep, but she saw the logic in it. How long? Week, maybe 2. I'd look after her. The offer hung between them, laden with implications. It meant she'd have a reason to come back. It meant trusting him with something precious. It meant acknowledging that this arrangement had become something more than mere survival. All right, she said finally. If you're sure it's no trouble. No trouble. But neither of them moved to prepare for departure. Instead, they fell into what was becoming routine. Morning coffee, thick and black. Lessons in survival. Today, how to find and purify water. How to build a shelter from nothing but brush and stones. Afternoon hunts, evening meals, nights by the fire with books and carefully rationed conversation. On the 6th day, Luke took her deeper into the canyon system, to a place where ancient peoples had carved symbols into the rock, spirals and stick figures, suns and moons, stories written in stone. Older than the Apache, he said, tracing a spiral with one finger. Older than the Spanish. People forget this land has history beyond what we know. Annabeth studied the petroglyphs, trying to imagine the hands that had made them. Do you know what they mean? Some. This one's water. This, journey. That spiral could be time or life or the path of seasons. He pointed to a figure that might have been human, might have been spirit. The old ones who showed me said this meant the one who walks between worlds. Between worlds, she repeated softly. I know that feeling. Luke looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with propriety. Yes, he said. I think you do. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then Luke stepped back, breaking the spell. Storm coming, he said, though the sky was clear. Should head back. But when they returned to the shelter, the tension followed. It was there in the way they carefully avoided touching as they prepared dinner, in the loaded silences between sparse words, in how they both found reasons to step outside for air that wasn't thick with unspoken possibility. That night, Annabeth lay wakeful, aware of every sound Luke made as he shifted in his bedroll. She thought about Michael, about the life she'd planned as a minister's wife. Safe, respectable, predictable. Then she thought about these past days, about learning to shoot and track and survive, about conversations that went deeper than any she'd had in her proper life. Can't sleep? Luke's voice came soft through the darkness. No. She heard him get up, heard the strike of a match. He lit a candle, the small flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. He looked different in this light. Younger, more vulnerable. Want some tea? Help sometimes. She sat up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Yes, thank you. He busied himself with the pot. Movements economical as always. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed, and this time neither pulled away. Luke, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. I know, he said quietly. I know. They sat in silence, sipping tea that tasted of mint and something wild. Finally, Luke spoke. My sister Sarah was 17 when they killed her. Her and my parents both. I was scouting for the army, 3 days away. Came back to ashes and graves. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white around his cup. Men who did it wore badges. Said my father was harboring outlaws. Truth was, he wouldn't sell our water rights to the big ranchers. Annabeth's throat tightened. Luke tracked them for 2 years. Found them all eventually. He looked at her, his gray eyes hard as flint. Did what needed doing. Been running ever since. She should have been horrified. Should have recoiled from this admission of violence. Instead, she thought of Sarah, 17 and full of life. Reading Walter Scott in the margins of her days. Thought of parents murdered for water in a dry land. Thought of justice and revenge and the thin line between them. I'm glad, she said simply. I'm glad you found them. He stared at her, something raw and surprised in his expression. Then he reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull back. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, rough with callus but infinitely gentle. Annabeth, he said, and her name on his lips was confession and question and prayer all at once. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I should go to Bitter Creek tomorrow. Yes, I should start my new life, become a laundress, forget about... Yes. But neither of them moved. The candle flickered, throwing their shadows large on the stone walls. when Luke's hand dropped. She caught it, holding it between both of hers. She could feel his pulse, rapid as her own. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "I don't want you to go." The admission hung between them, dangerous as dynamite. They were from different worlds. She, the cast-off daughter of respectability. He, the fugitive tracker with blood on his hands. It couldn't work, wouldn't work. But when he leaned forward, she met him halfway. The kiss was careful, tentative, as if they were both made of glass. Then she made a small sound in her throat, and careful shattered into something else entirely. His hands tangled in her hair. Hers gripped his shoulders. And years of loneliness and loss and longing poured between them like flash flood through a dry canyon. When they broke apart, breathing hard, the world had shifted on its axis. "This changes things," Luke said roughly. "Everything's already changed." She touched the scar on his jaw, felt him shiver. "I'm not who I was a week ago." "Neither am I." They stayed there, forehead to forehead, hands clasped, while the candle burned low and the night wind sang through stone. Finally. Luke pulled back, his expression a mix of wonder and resolve. "Stay," he said. "Not forever if you don't want, but stay for now. I'll teach you everything I know. How to live out here. How to be free." Free. The word resonated in her bones. Free from shame, from others' expectations, from the narrow life that had been mapped for her since birth. "And when people come looking, because they will, eventually, for you or for me." His smile was sharp as a blade. "Then we'll face them together, or run together, but together." Annabeth thought of Bitter Creek, of laundry and lonely nights and starting over among strangers. Then she thought of this, of dawn coffee and desert lessons, and a man who saw her not as damaged goods, but as someone worth teaching, worth keeping, worth kissing in the candlelight. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." This time when he kissed her, it was with promise instead of desperation. When they finally parted, the first pale light of dawn was touching the canyon walls. A new day in a new world, where barren women could be holy, where trackless men could find home, where love grew wild in the spaces between stones. Annabeth Whitlow had come to the canyon of wild kisses seeking escape. What she'd found instead was possibility. The days that followed their first kiss were charged with new awareness. Every glance held weight. Every accidental touch sent sparks through Annabeth's skin. Yet Luke maintained careful distance during daylight hours, teaching her with the same patient focus as before, how to tan hide, how to read weather in cloud formations, how to move silent as Apache through the brush. Only in the evenings, by firelight, did he allow himself to sit close enough that their shoulders touched. Their hands found each other in the dancing shadows. "You're afraid of ruining me," Annabeth said one night, after he'd pulled back from a kiss that had threatened to consume them both. Luke stared into the fire, jaw tight. "Already ruined enough in this life? I'm not some innocent girl. Luke, I'm a woman who was thrown away. Damaged goods. Remember?" The bitter words tasted strange now, almost foreign. "You can't ruin what's already broken. You're not broken." His voice was fierce. "Don't ever say that again." She turned to face him fully, cupping his scarred jaw. "Then stop treating me like I'm made of glass." Something shifted in his gray eyes, heat and hunger and barely leashed control. "Annabeth, I know what I want. Do you?" Instead of answering with words, he kissed her with a desperation that matched her own. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling pins free until it cascaded over her shoulders. She gasped against his mouth, fingers working at the buttons of his shirt, needing to feel skin against skin. "Not here," he said roughly, pulling back. "You deserve better than the ground." He led her to his bed of furs, hands shaking as he spread them wide. The gesture was oddly formal, almost ceremonial. When he turned back to her, his expression was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "Been a long time," he admitted. "Since before." "I know." She stepped close, pressing her palm over his racing heart. "For me too. My wedding night was supposed to be—" She trailed off, shaking her head. But this is better. This is choosing. They came together slowly, learning each other's rhythms. Luke's hands were reverent as they mapped her body, treating each revealed inch like something precious. Annabeth had expected roughness from a man who lived by violence, but his touch was achingly gentle, as if he was afraid she might vanish. When they finally joined, it was with sighs rather than words. Annabeth had been told by married friends to expect pain, to endure for duty's sake, but this was nothing like those whispered warnings. This was fire and tenderness, giving and taking, two lonely souls finding home in each other's arms. Luke moved above her in the firelight, his scarred face transformed by wonder, and she understood that she was claiming him as much as he was claiming her. Afterwards, they lay entwined in the furs, sweat cooling on their skin. Luke traced patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch raising goosebumps. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None." She turned to kiss his chest, tasting salt and smoke. "You?" His arm tightened around her. "Only that I can't give you a proper life. House, respectability, all those things a woman should have. I had those things. They came with conditions I couldn't meet." She propped herself on an elbow to look at him. "This, what we have, it's honest. That matters more." They made love again as dawn broke, slower this time, memorizing each sensation. When they finally rose, something fundamental had changed. The careful distance was gone, replaced by casual intimacy, a hand on a waist while passing, a kiss dropped on a neck while cooking, the comfortable tangle of limbs while reading by firelight. Luke began calling her wife of the canyon in quiet moments, the Apache endearment rolling off his tongue like a promise. Annabeth had been raised to believe marriage meant churches and licenses and social approval, but here, witnessed only by stone and sky, she felt more married than she would have in any chapel. They developed new routines, morning baths in the cold spring, Luke washing her hair with patient hands, hunting together, moving as a unit through the brush, evenings spent planning improvements to their shelter, a better chimney, storage for winter supplies, perhaps even a wooden floor over the packed earth. "Teaching you to survive alone," Luke said one day with wry humor, "but making plans like you'll stay forever. Maybe both can be true." Annabeth replied, not looking up from the hide she was working. "Prepare for the worst, hope for the best." But the worst found them sooner than expected. It was nearly 3 weeks after that first night when Luke tensed during their morning meal, head cocked like a listening wolf. Without a word, he moved to the entrance, rifle in hand. Annabeth had learned to read his moods, knew the difference between caution and alarm. This was the latter. "Horses," he said quietly. 4, maybe 5, moving slow, looking for something. "Apaches? No, shod horses, white men." His face was grim. "Get dressed. Pack light, water, ammunition, dried food. Might need to run." Her hands shook as she obeyed, pulling on her riding clothes, filling a pack with essentials. Luke was already saddling the horses, movement swift but calm. He'd clearly done this before. "Could be nothing," he said, but she heard the lie in it. "Could be hunters, lost travelers, or someone's finally tracked one of us down." They led the horses through the back passage, a narrow crack in the rock that Luke had shown her for emergencies. From a hidden vantage point, they could see the main approach to their canyon. 5 riders picked their way up the trail, studying the ground, even from a distance. Annabeth could see they were armed, alert, purposeful. Then one turned his head, and her heart stopped. "I know him," she whispered. "Samuel Morrison, my cousin, the one in the brown coat." Luke's hand found hers, squeezing tight. "They found you then, not me. That's good. Means they might not shoot first. He's not alone. Those others, hired guns, from the look of them. Your family wants you back bad." She thought of her parents' horror, their fear of scandal. Of course they'd sent Samuel, her father's nephew, a cold man who'd never approved of her. They don't want me back. They want to bury me somewhere quiet, where I can't embarrass them further. Luke studied the approaching riders with professional interest. Could pick off 2, maybe 3, before they found cover. But your cousin, no. She gripped his arm. No killing. Not for me. Then we run. Now. While they're still navigating the approach. He was already turning away when she stopped him. Wait, Annabeth, we don't have time. I won't run anymore. The words surprised her as much as him. I won't spend my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when they'll find us. If they want to drag me back, they'll have to do it honestly, in daylight. Luke's face was a study in conflicting emotions. They could force you, claim you're hysterical, not in your right mind. Law's on their side. Then I'll make enough noise that everyone from here to California knows exactly what kind of people the Whitlows are. She squared her shoulders, finding steel she didn't know she possessed. I choose this life. Choose you. Let them try to take it. He kissed her hard. Quick. Together then, but my way. You stay back. Let me do the talking. And if shooting starts, you run. Promise me. Luke. Promise. All right. I promise. They positioned themselves strategically. Luke visible but covered. Annabeth in the shadows where she could retreat if needed. The riders approached cautiously. Samuel in the lead. Up close, she could see the weeks of travel on them, the determination that had driven them across desert and mountain. That's far enough, Luke called when they were within rifle range. State your business. Samuel's eyes found Annabeth despite the shadows. His face twisted with disgust. I might have known. Annabeth, you've disgraced yourself utterly, living in sin with this savage. Hello to you too, Samuel. She stepped forward despite Luke's warning gesture. How's Aunt Catherine? Still pretending her laudanum habit is medicinal? His face flushed. Your parents sent me to bring you home. They're willing to forgive this aberration. There's a convent in San Francisco that takes fallen women. You'll be cared for, given useful work. Locked away. You mean hidden like a shameful secret? It's more than you deserve. His voice hardened. Do you have any idea what you've put your family through? The scandal? Your father's had to resign from the city council. Your mother can barely show her face at church. Good. The word cracked like a whip. They threw me away like garbage. Samuel cast me out for something beyond my control. They deserve every moment of shame. One of the hired men shifted restlessly. We taking her or not? This ain't what I signed on for, family squabbles and such. Samuel ignored him, focusing on Annabeth. You're not well. This man has obviously taken advantage of your vulnerable state. Luke's laugh was dark as midnight. Mister, I'd rethink that line of talk. The lady's made her choice clear. The lady, Samuel spat, is my cousin, and she's coming with us, willing or not. No, Annabeth said clearly. I'm not. You don't have a choice. Your father signed papers. You're not competent to make decisions, given your hysterical behavior. My hysterical behavior? She laughed, high and sharp. You mean refusing to disappear quietly? Refusing to pretend I'm dead because my body won't do what bodies are supposed to do? She walked forward, past Luke's protection, until she stood in clear view. Let them see her in men's clothes, hair loose like an Indian woman, skin brown from sun and work. Let them see what she'd become. Look at me, Samuel, really look. Do I seem hysterical, incompetent? Or do I look like a woman who's finally free? Samuel's hand moved to his gun. You're coming with us, one way or another. The click of Luke's rifle cocking was loud in the morning air. Touch that iron and you'll be explaining to St. Peter why you drew on an unarmed woman. The hired guns tensed, hands hovering near weapons. For a moment, violence crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Then Annabeth did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She laughed, not the bitter laugh of before, but something genuine and free. You traveled all this way, she said to Samuel. Spent God knows how much of Uncle Theodore's money just to drag back a barren woman? Why? What could possibly be worth this effort? Samuel's composure cracked slightly. Family honor? Be honest, cousin. It's not about honor. It's about property. She saw the truth of it in his eyes. Grandmother's inheritance. The land that comes to me when I turn 25, that's what this is really about. The silence stretched taut. One of the hired men muttered something about not signing on for kidnapping. You're sick, Samuel said finally. Living like an animal with this killer. Yes, he's killed. Annabeth's voice was steady as stone. Men who murdered his family. Men who deserved killing. Can you say the same about your conscience? Samuel, you who foreclosed on the widow Martinez last winter, who turned her and her children out to starve. That was business. That was cruelty. And you have the gall to call us savage? She felt Luke move up beside her, his presence solid as the mountains. His free hand found hers, fingers interlacing. Here's what's going to happen, Annabeth said, finding strength in that touch. You're going to turn around and ride back to Cedar Falls. You're going to tell my parents that you found me dead. Bones in the desert, picked clean by coyotes. Tragic end to a tragic girl. Annabeth, in return, I'll sign papers renouncing any claim to grandmother's land. You can have it all. Samuel, every acre, every penny. That's what you really want, isn't it? Samuel's face cycled through emotions. Anger, calculation, greed. You'd give up your inheritance. I already have. She gestured at the canyon walls, the wide sky. This is my inheritance now. This life, this man, this freedom. The family will want proof. Then tell them the truth, that you found me living as the wife of Luke Rollins, the tracker, that I chose this life over their cages, that I'd rather be a fallen woman in the wilderness than a proper lady in their parlor. Her voice hardened. Tell them I'm happy, Samuel. Tell them I'm finally, truly happy. One of the hired men spoke up. Boss, we taking her or not? Because if not, I'd like to head back. This ain't sitting right with me. Samuel stared at Annabeth for a long moment. She could see him weighing options, the difficulty of forcing her back, the questions it would raise, the inheritance waiting to be claimed. You'll sign the papers? He asked finally. Draw them up. I'll sign them now, in front of these witnesses. It took an hour. Samuel had come prepared with documents. Of course he had. Annabeth signed away her birthright with a steady hand, feeling lighter with each scratch of the pen. When it was done, Samuel rolled the papers carefully, his face unreadable. You're dead to them, you know, he said. This makes it official. No changing your mind, no coming back. I know. He mounted his horse, paused. That Reverend Hartley, he left town a month after you did. Conscience got to him. Maybe. Heard he went back east. The news should have meant something. But Annabeth found she didn't care. That life, that girl who'd stood at the altar in her mother's dress, she was the one who was dead. Goodbye, Samuel. He nodded once, then spurred his horse. The hired men followed, clearly relieved to be done with the whole affair. Annabeth and Luke stood watching until they were dots in the distance, then gone entirely. You gave up a fortune, Luke said quietly. I gained something worth more. She turned into his arms, burying her face against his chest. The tears came then, not of sorrow, but of release. The last chains falling away. Luke held her as she cried, one hand stroking her hair. Wife of the canyon, he murmured. Brave as any warrior. When the tears were done, they walked back to their shelter. It looked different somehow. Not a hiding place, but a home. Their home. That night, they made love with desperate passion, affirming life and choice and freedom. Luke worshipped her body with hands and mouth, whispering Apache endearments she was beginning to understand. She rose above him in the firelight, taking control, taking what she needed, giving what he craved. No more running, she gasped as they moved together. No more hiding. No more, he agreed, pulling her down for a kiss that stole her breath. You're mine now. Legal papers be damned. And you're mine. They fell asleep tangled together, skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. Outside, coyotes sang to the rising moon, their wild chorus a benediction for choices made and bridges burned. Annabeth Whitlow was dead. In her place was simply Annabeth, wife of the canyon. woman of the wilderness, finally and completely free. Winter came early to the canyon that year, bringing nights sharp with frost and mornings white with rime. Annabeth had never known such contentment as these quiet months with Luke. They'd expanded their shelter, adding a proper wooden door salvaged from an abandoned prospector's cabin, thick shutters for the windows, and even a rough table where they could work side by side. He repairing traps and cleaning weapons, she sewing clothes from traded fabric and the hides he brought home. "Never thought I'd see you so domestic," she teased one evening, watching him carefully sort beans for their supper. "Never thought I'd have reason to be," he replied, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. They'd settled into rhythms as natural as breathing. Dawn meant coffee and planning the day's work, mornings for hunting or gathering, checking Luke's trap lines, tending the horses, afternoons for the endless tasks of survival, smoking meat, mending gear, collecting firewood, evenings by the fire, reading aloud from their small collection of books, sharing stories, sharing silence, sharing the furs that had become their marriage bed. But peace never lasted long in the territories. The first sign of trouble came in late February. Luke returned from checking his northern trap line with a grim expression, rifle held ready even within sight of home. "Tracks," he said without preamble. "5 riders, maybe 6, moving steady through Miller's Pass. Apaches? No, shod horses, like before, but not your family this time." He unsaddled his gray with quick efficiency. "These men know how to move in country. Ex-military, maybe, or worse. Looking for you?" His jaw tightened. "Maybe. Been 5 years since I finished that business. Might be someone figured out where I went." Annabeth felt cold despite the afternoon sun. They'd had months of happiness, months of pretending the outside world couldn't touch them. "What do we do?" "Watch. Wait. Be ready." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Might be nothing. Might be they're after someone else entirely. But Luke's instincts proved true. 3 days later, Annabeth was gathering early spring greens near the creek when she heard horses approaching. She faded into the brush as Luke had taught her, hand on the pistol he insisted she carry, through the screen of willows. She saw them, 5 men, hard-faced and well-armed, studying the ground with professional interest. The leader dismounted, kneeling by the tracks she and Luke had left that morning. He was a thin man with dead eyes and pockmarked skin, wearing his guns low and tied down. "2 people," he said to the others. "Man and woman, from the boot prints. Recent. Could be anyone." One of the riders suggested, "Lots of folks pass through here." "Could be." The thin man stood, scanning the canyon walls. But Rollins always did favor high ground and hidden approaches. And word in Prescott was he took up with some woman. Annabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. They were hunting Luke, just as he'd feared. She began to ease backward, desperate to warn him, when a hand covered her mouth. She nearly screamed before recognizing Luke's scent, his touch. "Quiet," he breathed in her ear. "Don't move." They crouched together, watching the hunters who hunted them. The men were thorough, checking for sign, discussing strategy. Professional killers, Annabeth realized. The kind who never stopped until the job was done. "Henderson wants him alive if possible," the leader was saying. "Wants to see Rollins hang proper for killing his brothers. And if it ain't possible, then dead works too, long as we got proof." The thin man smiled, an expression that made Annabeth shudder. The woman's no concern either way. Collateral damage. They waited until the riders moved on, following the creek away from their actual shelter. Only then did Luke release her, his face carved from stone. "Pack," he said. "Quick and light. We leave within the hour." "Luke." "No argument. Annabeth, these aren't like your cousin. These men kill for money and pleasure both." He was already moving, gathering weapons, essential supplies. "I won't let them have you." She wanted to protest, to say they could fight, could defend their home. But she saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her, and understood. "Where?" South first. Throw them off. Then circle back north. Maybe cross into Colorado territory. He paused in his packing to cup her face. I'm sorry. Thought we'd have more time before my past caught up. Our past, she corrected. We're in this together, remember? They worked in focused silence, taking only what they could carry: food, water, ammunition, bedrolls, the minimum tools for survival. Everything else, the furniture they'd built, the small comforts they'd gathered, would be left behind. Another life abandoned. As the sun touched the western peaks, they led the horses out through the hidden back passage. Annabeth turned for one last look at the shelter that had become home. The canyon walls glowed red in the dying light, and she memorized every detail, every shadow. We'll find another place, Luke said softly, reading her grief. Build another home. I know. She mounted Buttermilk, now fully healed and eager for travel. It was perfect here. You made it perfect. He swung onto his gray, rifle across the saddle. That's what you do, make broken things whole. They rode through the night, using trails Luke knew from years of wandering. He led them through water to break their tracks, over slick rock that left no sign, always choosing the harder path that would frustrate pursuit. By dawn, they were 20 miles from the canyon, sheltered in a grove of cottonwoods while the horses rested. They're good, Luke said, studying their back trail through field glasses. But not good enough. Lost our track at Willow Springs. Looks like... So we're safe? For now. But men like that don't give up easy. They'll cast wide, check every settlement, every trading post. He lowered the glasses, face troubled. I should take you somewhere safe. Fort Collins, maybe, or... If you try to leave me behind for my own good, Luke Rollins, I'll shoot you myself. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Fierce woman. You're woman. That means where you go. I go, for better or worse. This is definitely worse. I've seen worse. She moved closer, taking his hand. Worse is standing at an altar being told you're worthless. Worse is your parents turning their backs. This is just another adventure. They traveled for 3 days, always moving, always watching. Luke's knowledge of the country served them well. He knew every hidden spring, every box canyon, every place where a person could disappear. But he also knew they couldn't run forever. Henderson, he said on the 4th night, as they camped without fire in a shallow cave. Should have known he'd never let it lie. Tell me, Annabeth said simply. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, the Henderson brothers ran the town where my family lived. 3 of them, James, William, and Carl. They wanted our water rights, like I told you. When my father refused to sell... He paused, lost in memory. I was away, came back to find the house burned, my parents and Sarah dead. The sheriff said it was Indians, but I knew better, found proof eventually. William's watch in the ashes, Carl's boot print in my sister's blood. Annabeth gripped his hand tighter but said nothing. Took me 2 years to track them all down. James first, caught him alone on his ranch. Made him tell me where the others were. William next, in a saloon in Tucson. Carl last, hiding out in Mexico. His voice was flat, emotionless. I did what needed doing, what the law wouldn't do, but there was a 4th brother, Daniel Henderson, back east when it all happened. But blood is blood. Guess he finally decided to settle accounts. You did the right thing, Annabeth said fiercely. They murdered your family. Maybe, but right and legal aren't always the same. And now you're paying for my choices. I'm not paying for anything. I'm choosing to stand with the man I love. She turned his face to hers in the darkness. Do you understand that? This isn't happening to me. I'm part of it. Part of you. He kissed her then, desperate and grateful. They made love in the cave, quick and urgent, affirming life while death tracked them through the darkness. After, they lay wrapped in their bedrolls, her head on his chest, listening to coyotes in the distance. There's another way, Luke said suddenly. Instead of running. What way? Face them, but smart, on ground of our choosing. She felt him smile in the darkness. You gave me an idea, back with your cousin, about making noise, refusing to go quiet. Luke, there's a town 2 days north, Sage Creek. Decent folks, fair sheriff. If we went there openly, made ourselves known. He was thinking aloud now. Henderson's men are killers, but they're careful. Won't want witnesses. Won't want law trouble. Not when they're this far from home. You want to hide in plain sight? Not hide. Stand. Make them come at us where we have advantages. His arms tightened around her. Risky, but maybe less risky than running until they catch us exhausted and alone. Annabeth considered. Everything in her rebelled against running, against letting these men drive them from place to place like hunted animals. All right, but we do this together. No noble sacrifices. No sending me away from my own good. Together, he agreed. Always. They reached Sage Creek at midday, riding down the main street bold as brass. The town was larger than Annabeth expected. A proper main street with businesses, a hotel, even a small school. People stopped to stare at the strangers, but the looks were more curious than hostile. Luke led them straight to the sheriff's office. The man behind the desk was older, gray-bearded, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. His hand didn't go to his gun, but Annabeth could see he was ready. Sheriff Walsh, Luke said, removing his hat. I'm Luke Rollins. This is my wife, Annabeth. We're here to report some men who might be coming through, looking to cause trouble. Walsh's eyebrows rose slightly at the name. Rollins. Heard that name before. You, the tracker, used to work for the Army? I am. Also heard you killed 3 men down in Arizona territory a few years back. I did. Luke met his gaze steadily. They murdered my family. I found them when the law couldn't or wouldn't. Walsh studied him for a long moment. And these men coming through, brother of one of those I killed, hired guns with him. They've been tracking us for days. You bringing trouble to my town? Rollins? No, sir, hoping to prevent it. Luke glanced at Annabeth. We're tired of running. Figured to make a stand where there's law and witnesses. Men like those hunting us prefer shadows. Hard to bushwhack someone in broad daylight on a main street. Unless they don't care about witnesses. Then you'll have cause to arrest them, won't you? Walsh leaned back, chair creaking. His eyes moved to Annabeth, taking in her worn clothes, her determined face. This true, ma'am, you with this man of your own will? Every step, she said firmly. He saved my life. Sheriff, in more ways than one. Now men want to kill him for seeking justice the law denied. I won't let that happen without a fight. Spirited woman, Walsh observed. My wife, Luke said with quiet pride. The sheriff was quiet for a moment. Then, there's a boarding house on 2nd Street, Mahalloway's place, clean rooms, good food. You stay there, in town where folks can see you. These men show up. They'll have to declare their business. We don't cotton to hired killers here in Sage Creek. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet. I can't stop men from calling you out fair. And if you draw first, I'll arrest you same as them. Understood. They left the office and walked to Ma Holloway's, a tidy 2-story building with curtains in the windows and flowers struggling to grow in boxes despite the early season. The proprietress was a stout woman with kind eyes who showed them to a room without asking questions beyond whether they preferred morning or evening baths. Been a while since we slept in a real bed, Annabeth said, testing the mattress. Been a while since a lot of things. Luke stood at the window, watching the street, always watching. You could still leave. Take the stage to Denver, start fresh. She moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Luke Rollins, I swear if you suggest leaving one more time. I know, you'll shoot me yourself. And I'm a good shot now. You taught me. He turned in her arms, and she saw the fear he'd been hiding. I can face dying. Did it every day for years. But losing you? You won't. We're going to be smart. Careful. We're going to face this together. And when it's done, we'll find another canyon. Build another home. She pulled his head down for a kiss. Have faith. In what? In us. In the life we've chosen. in the fact that love might actually be stronger than hate. He held her close, and she felt him tremble slightly. This man who'd faced death countless times, who'd tracked killers across deserts, was afraid. Not for himself, but for her, for them, for the future they'd only just begun to build. "All right," he said finally. "We make our stand." That night, they ate in the boarding house dining room with the other guests. Word had already spread. The tracker Luke Rollins was in town with his wife. The men hunting him might follow, but instead of fear, Annabeth sensed something else from the townspeople. Respect, perhaps. Or maybe just the frontier appreciation for those who face trouble head-on instead of bringing it in the back door. After dinner, they walked the main street arm in arm like any married couple. Luke bought her a shawl from the general store, impractical pale blue wool that matched her eyes. She found him a new shirt to replace one torn in their flight. Small, normal things that felt like defiance against those who would end their story before it properly began. In their room that night, they made love slowly, thoroughly, as if they had all the time in the world. Afterward, lying in an actual bed with actual sheets, Annabeth felt a strange peace settle over her. "Whatever happens," she said into the darkness, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "These months with you have been the happiest of my life. If I had to choose again, knowing everything, I'd still walk into that desert, still let you find me." His arms tightened around her. "Annabeth, I love you. Luke Rollins, completely. Whatever tomorrow brings. That won't change. I love you too, more than I thought possible. You brought me back to life." They held each other as the night deepened. Two people who'd found love in the wilderness, now waiting for violence to find them in civilization. But they would face it as they'd faced everything else. Together, without shame, without running. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, they had each other. For Annabeth, for now, that was enough. They came on the fourth day, just as the sun reached its zenith. Annabeth was helping Ma Holloway hang laundry when she saw them. 5 riders moving down Main Street with the deliberate pace of men who wanted to be noticed. The thin man with dead eyes led them, his gaze sweeping the storefronts until it found what it sought. Luke stepped out of the sheriff's office where he'd been discussing patrol routes with Walsh. He stood relaxed but ready, hand nowhere near his gun, but clearly capable of reaching it in a heartbeat. Annabeth's breath caught as she watched the two forces converge, past and present, violence and hope. "Rollins," the thin man called, reining up in the middle of the street. "Been looking for you." "Jed Morse," Luke replied, apparently recognizing him. "Still doing Henderson's dirty work, I see. Man pays well for loyalty." Morse dismounted, his men spreading out slightly. Too slightly. Sheriff Walsh had been clear about the town's position on gunplay. "Mr. Henderson wants to talk to you about his brothers." "Nothing to talk about. They murdered my family. They paid for it. That's done. Not for Mr. Henderson. It ain't." Morse's smile was cold. "But he's a reasonable man. Come with us quiet-like, and we'll leave your woman be." Annabeth stepped forward before Luke could respond, still carrying Ma Holloway's washing basket. "I don't appreciate being discussed like I'm not here, Mr. Morse." The gunman's eyes flicked to her, dismissive. "This ain't your concern, woman." "My husband's life is very much my concern." She set down the basket with deliberate calm. "As is the fact that you're threatening citizens who've broken no laws in this jurisdiction. Your husband killed 3 men 5 years ago in Arizona territory, where he faced no charges because those men were murderers." Annabeth's voice carried clear across the street. People were gathering now, drawn by the drama. "You have no legal authority here." Morse's face darkened. "Don't need authority to call a man out fair." "Then do it," Luke said quietly. "But know this, you draw on me, and you'll answer to the law here. Sheriff Walsh has been clear about that." As if summoned, Walsh emerged from his office, shotgun cradled casual but ready. "Gentlemen, If you're planning to disturb my town's peace, I'll need you to state your business official-like. No crime in calling out a murderer, Morse said. No crime in defending yourself against false accusations neither, Walsh replied. Rollins here's been a model citizen since arriving. You boys, on the other hand, look like trouble waiting to happen. The tension stretched taut. Annabeth could see Morse calculating. 5 guns against Luke and possibly the sheriff. But with witnesses gathering and no clear legal ground, not the shadowy ambush they'd planned. Then one of Morse's men shifted, hand moving toward his weapon, and everything changed. Luke's gun appeared in his hand so fast Annabeth barely saw him draw. The shot was impossibly loud in the afternoon quiet, and the man's gun spun away. His hand bloodied but not destroyed. Next one goes center mass, Luke said calmly. Gun steady. Your choice, Morse. For a moment, violence trembled on the edge of erupting. Then Sheriff Walsh stepped forward. Shotgun now pointed directly at Morse. That's enough. You boys are under arrest for disturbing the peace and threatening citizens. We ain't done nothing. You rode in here looking for trouble and found it. My jail or the road. Choose quick. Morse's jaw worked furiously. His eyes found Luke, promising future violence, then shifted to Annabeth with something worse than threat. This ain't over. It is for today, Walsh said firmly. Deputy Collins, help these men find their horses. They're leaving. The deputy appeared with 2 other men, all armed, outnumbered now and with legal authority against them. Morse had no choice. He mounted stiffly, gathering his men with sharp gestures. Henderson's got a long memory. Rollins, he called as they turned to leave. And deep pockets. We'll be back. I'll be here, Luke replied. They watched the riders disappear in a cloud of dust. Only when they were gone did Annabeth realize she was shaking. Luke's arm came around her, solid and warm. You all right? Yes. She leaned into him, not caring who saw. That was anticlimactic. Walsh chuckled grimly. Best kind of gunfight is the one that doesn't happen. But young Morse was right about one thing. This ain't over. Men like Henderson don't give up easy. I know. Luke holstered his weapon with practiced ease. But at least now it's in the open. No more running, no more looking over shoulders. That night, the boarding house dining room was full of talk. The confrontation had become instant legend, growing with each telling. Annabeth found herself something of a celebrity, the woman who'd faced down hired killers with nothing but words and washing. Weren't you frightened? Asked Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife. Terrified, Annabeth admitted. But fear's no reason to let evil win. Such a brave dear, Ma Holloway said, patting her hand. Though I dare say that basket of wet sheets would have made a fair weapon if needed. The women laughed, and Annabeth felt something she hadn't expected. Acceptance. These frontier women understood necessity, understood doing what must be done. They didn't see her as a fallen woman living in sin, but as a wife standing by her husband. Later, in their room, Luke sat by the window as had become his habit. But tonight, Annabeth sensed a different tension in him. They'll try again, he said. Different approach. Probably. Morse isn't stupid, just overconfident. I know. She began unpinning her hair, watching him in the mirror. Are you regretting our decision to stand and fight? No, just... He turned from the window, and she saw the rawness in his expression. When he looked at you today, the threat in his eyes, I wanted to kill him. Would have, if Walsh hadn't been there. But you didn't. You showed restraint. Only because killing him would have put you in more danger. Made us outlaws again. He moved to stand behind her, hands gentle as he helped with her hair. I'm trying to be better. The man you deserve. But the violence is still there. Annabeth, always will be. She turned on the small stool, taking his hands. I fell in love with who you are, not who you think I want you to be. The violence is part of you. Yes, but so is the gentleness, the way you tend wounded animals, the patience when you teach me, the reverence when you touch me. You're not just one thing, Luke. You see me different than I am. I see you clearly, and I choose all of it. He knelt before her, something breaking in his expression. I don't deserve you. Deserve has nothing to do with love? She cupped his scarred face, thumb tracing the mark that had become dear to her. We save each other. That's what partners do. They made love with desperate tenderness, each touch an affirmation against the uncertainty waiting outside. Afterward, Luke held her close, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. I've been thinking, he said into the darkness. After this is settled, however it goes, would you want to make it proper? Find a preacher? Have a real wedding? Annabeth smiled against his chest. Luke Rollins, are you proposing? Suppose I am. No, it's not conventional. Asking after we've already, but you deserve the words said proper. He shifted to look at her. Annabeth, will you marry me? Real and legal, in front of witnesses. We're already married in every way that matters. That's not an answer. She rose up to kiss him. Yes, though I warn you, I've had bad luck with weddings. This one will be different. How do you know? Because this time, you're choosing for love, not duty, and I'll be there at the altar, not running away. They talked quietly of possibilities. A simple ceremony, just them and witnesses. Nothing like the spectacle in Cedar Falls, but even as they planned, both knew the shadow hanging over them. Henderson's money could buy many guns, many attempts. This peaceful interlude was just that, an interlude. The next days passed in strange normalcy. Luke took work with the local blacksmith, his strength and skill with metal making him valuable. Annabeth helped Ma Holloway with the boarding house, cooking and cleaning and mending. They were building a life. Temporary, perhaps, but real. The townspeople rallied around them in subtle ways. The general store owner extended credit without being asked. The minister's wife invited Annabeth to the quilting circle. Even Sheriff Walsh made a point of checking on them daily, his presence a reminder that they weren't alone. It was almost a week later when the second attempt came. Annabeth was alone at the boarding house, Ma Holloway having gone to tend her sick sister. She was kneading bread in the kitchen when intuition, or perhaps the lessons Luke had taught her, made her freeze. Something was wrong. The house was too quiet, the afternoon birds silent. She reached for the shotgun Ma kept by the stove, checking the loads with steady hands. Luke had drilled her relentlessly. Stay calm, trust your instincts, don't hesitate when the moment comes. The back door exploded inward. Two men rushed in, guns drawn, clearly expecting a frightened woman. Instead, they found Annabeth behind the kitchen table, shotgun leveled. The first blast caught the lead man's center mass, throwing him backward. She worked the action smoothly, just as Luke had taught her, but the second man was already moving, diving behind the stove. Stupid move, woman, he snarled. Was supposed to take you quiet like, but now… Annabeth didn't let him finish. She fired through the stove, the buckshot punching holes in the thin metal. The man screamed, stumbling into view, and she put him down with grim efficiency. The silence after was deafening. Annabeth stood frozen, shotgun smoking, staring at what she'd done. Blood pooled on Ma Holloway's clean floor, and her hands began to shake. Annabeth! Luke burst through the front door, gun drawn. Sheriff Walsh right behind him. They'd heard the shots from the blacksmith's shop. Come running. I'm all right, she managed. They came through the back. I killed them. Luke gathered her into his arms as Walsh checked the bodies. She buried her face in his chest, shotgun clattering to the floor. You did what you had to, Luke murmured. You survived. Morse's men, Walsh confirmed grimly. Looks like they decided to try for leverage. He looked at Annabeth with new respect. Ma'am, that was some fine shooting. Luke taught me, she said numbly. Said I might need to, but I never thought… First kill's always hard, Walsh said gently. Even when it's justified. Even when it's them or you. They spent hours dealing with the aftermath. Statements, cleaning, trying to calm poor Ma Holloway when she returned to find her kitchen a battlefield. Through it all, Luke stayed close, his presence anchoring Annabeth as she grappled with what she'd done. That night, she couldn't eat, couldn't settle. The faces of the dead men haunted her, the sound of the shotgun echoing in her ears. "Does it get easier?" she asked Luke as they lay in bed. "The killing?" "No," he said honestly. "Not if you're still human, but the guilt fades when you remember why you did it. They came to hurt you, maybe kill you. You defended yourself. I know, logically, I know. But knowing and feeling are different things." He pulled her closer. "You want to leave? We could still run, find somewhere." "No." The word came out fiercer than she intended. "No more running. They came into Ma's house, violated this place that took us in. I won't let them win. My fierce wife." There was pride and sorrow, both in his voice. "Your wife, who's now a killer too." She felt him tense and added quickly, "That's not a bad thing. Not anymore. I understand now. A little. What you carry, the weight of it. I never wanted that for you. I know. But this is the life we've chosen. The life I've chosen. And I'll defend it." Word of the attack spread quickly. If the townspeople had been sympathetic before, now they were outright protective. Annabeth had defended hearth and home against invaders. In the frontier code, nothing was more righteous. 3 days later, a telegram arrived for Luke. Sheriff Walsh delivered it personally, his face grave. "Henderson's coming himself," Luke read aloud. "Tired of hired men failing. Offers to meet me fair, single combat. Winner walks away clean." "It's a trap," Annabeth said immediately. "Has to be. Maybe. Or maybe he's truly tired of this. Man against man, the way his brothers should have faced me." Luke studied the telegram. "He names the time and place. Miller's Flat, noon, 3 days hence. I know the spot." Walsh said, "Open ground. No cover for ambush. If a man wanted a fair fight, that's where he'd choose." "You're not going," Annabeth said. "Not alone. I have to. This ends one way or another." Luke looked at her, and she saw the weariness there. "I'm tired of watching over my shoulder, tired of putting you in danger. If Henderson wants his chance, I'll give it to him." They argued for hours, but Luke was adamant. This was his fight, his past to settle. Annabeth raged and pleaded and finally wept, but nothing swayed him. "Then I'm coming with you," she said finally. "Not to interfere, just to be there, to witness." "Annabeth, those are my terms. You face him, I stand witness. Otherwise, I swear I'll follow anyway." He knew her well enough to recognize the steel in her voice. "All right, but you stay with Walsh. Stay safe. Whatever happens, you don't interfere. And afterward, if you—" She couldn't say it. "If I fall, you take the money I've saved. Ma Holloway knows where. And you start fresh. Promise me." "I promise nothing except this. If you die, Luke Rollins, I'll follow you to the other side just to give you hell for leaving me." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "I believe you would." The night before the confrontation, they loved with desperate passion, as if trying to store up enough touch and taste and feeling to last forever. Neither slept, holding each other as dawn approached like an executioner. "I love you," Annabeth whispered as they dressed. "Whatever happens, remember that." "How could I forget? You're the reason I want to live." He checked his gun with steady hands. "But sometimes, to protect what we love, we have to face what we fear." They rode out together, Luke, Annabeth, Sheriff Walsh, and a handful of townsmen who insisted on witnessing. The morning was clear and cold, spring fighting winter for dominance. At Miller's Flat, a lone figure waited. Daniel Henderson was nothing like Annabeth expected. Older, grayer, with the look of a businessman rather than a gunfighter. He stood beside an expensive carriage, no other men visible. "Rollins," he called as they approached. "Appreciate you coming." "Henderson." Luke dismounted, moving with careful precision. "Your men said you wanted to talk before we do this." "I did. Do!" Henderson stepped forward, and Annabeth saw he wore no gun. "I've spent 5 years hating you, 5 years planning revenge, hired the best killers money could buy. And what did it get me? Dead employees and continued emptiness." Luke said nothing, waiting. My brothers were bastards. Henderson continued, shocking everyone. I knew it, even loved them despite it. When I heard what they did to your family, he shook his head. Part of me knew they had it coming, but they were still my blood. Where's this going, Henderson? I'm tired. The older man suddenly looked every one of his years. Tired of hate, tired of death, tired of feeding this vendetta. So I came to ask, can it end here? No gunfight, no more killing. Just let it end. The silence stretched across the flat. Annabeth held her breath, watching Luke wrestle with years of conditioning, years of expecting violence. Finally, slowly, Luke nodded. Your men leave us be. No more hunters, no more threats. We disappear. You never look for us again. Agreed. Henderson reached into his coat, carefully, telegraphing the movement, and pulled out a leather pouch. There's 5,000 here. Call it compensation for the trouble. Take your woman. Start fresh somewhere. Live the life my brother stole from you the first time. Luke stared at the pouch like it might bite. Why? Because I've got children of my own now. What lessons am I teaching them with this blood feud? Henderson set the pouch on a rock between them. Take it. Build something instead of destroying. Maybe that's the best revenge on my brothers anyway. You living well despite them. It was Annabeth who moved first, sliding down from buttermilk and walking to Luke's side. She studied Henderson with eyes that had learned to read men's truths. You swear this ends here? She asked. No more hunting, no more vengeance. I swear on my children's lives. Henderson met her gaze steadily. I've seen what vengeance costs. Time to try something else. She looked at Luke, saw him struggling with the anticlimax, the unexpected mercy. Then she took his hand, grounding him. We accept, she said simply. The tension broke like a snapped wire. Henderson actually smiled, a tired, sad expression. The Apache believe in circles. I'm told, things coming round to where they began. Maybe this is that. He climbed into his carriage without another word. As it rolled away, Annabeth felt years of weight lifting from Luke's shoulders. Is it really over? Someone asked. Appears so, Walsh said, wonder in his voice. Well, I'll be damned. Excuse the language, ma'am. Luke stood staring after the carriage, the pouch of money forgotten at his feet. I was ready to die, ready to kill, but this is better, Annabeth said firmly. This is life instead of death, future instead of past. He turned to her then, and she saw the lost look in his eyes. He'd defined himself by violence for so long, shaped himself for this confrontation that never came. What do I do now? He asked, so quietly only she could hear. Now? She smiled, stepping into his arms in full view of everyone. Now you marry me proper. We take that money and build a life somewhere. Have adventures that don't involve people trying to kill us. Grow old together. Simple as that? Simple as that. He kissed her then, there on Miller's flat, where death had turned a possibility. Around them. The witnesses cheered, and even stoic Sheriff Walsh smiled. They were married 3 days later in the little church in Sage Creek. Ma Holloway stood as matron of honor, Sheriff Walsh as best man. Annabeth wore a simple blue dress, her choice this time, for her wedding. Luke looked uncomfortable in his borrowed suit, but held her hand steady as they spoke their vows. I, Luke Rollins, take you, Annabeth, as my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. His voice was rough with emotion, and Annabeth felt tears slip down her cheeks. This time, when the minister pronounced them man and wife, no one objected. This time, the kiss at the altar was real and true, and theirs. The town threw them a small reception at the boarding house. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. As the sun set, Luke and Annabeth slipped away, walking hand in hand through the streets of the town that had sheltered them. No regrets? Luke asked, echoing his question from months ago in a canyon far away. None, Annabeth said, as she had then. But now, she added, only joy. They stood together, watching the stars emerge one by one, somewhere in the distance. Coyotes called to each other across the vast spaces. The sound no longer seemed lonely to Annabeth. Instead, it spoke of freedom, of wild things finding their way, of love that bloomed in the most unlikely places. So, Mrs. Rollins, Luke said, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. Where do we go from here? Annabeth smiled, leaning into his solid warmth. Wherever we want. The world's wide and we've got money, time, and each other. What more could we need? Nothing, he said, meaning it. Absolutely nothing. They walked back to the boarding house, to their wedding bed, to their future. Behind them, their shadows merged into one in the lamplight. Ahead lay territories unexplored, adventures unwon, a life to be built by their own hands and hearts. The girl who'd stood rejected at an altar was gone. The man who'd lived only for vengeance was transformed. In their place stood Luke and Annabeth Rollins, survivors, partners, lovers who'd found each other in the wilderness and chosen to stay found. It was, they both agreed, the very best of endings and the very best of beginnings. The peace lasted exactly 2 months. Luke and Annabeth had used Henderson's money wisely, purchasing supplies and planning their next move. They'd decided to head north to Montana Territory, where Luke had heard of good land available for homesteading. The morning, they planned to leave Sage Creek. Sheriff Walsh arrived at the boarding house with a grim expression. "Riders coming," he said without preamble. "About a dozen, moving fast from the south." Luke was already reaching for his rifle. Henderson broke his word. "Don't think so. These riders..." Walsh hesitated. "They're wearing badges, federal marshals, from the look of them." Annabeth felt her heart sink. After everything, to have the law itself turn against them seemed the cruelest twist. What could they want? Only one way to find out. Luke's face had gone stone hard, the gentleness of recent weeks vanishing. But federal marshals don't ride in force unless they're expecting trouble. They didn't have long to wait. The marshals rode into town like conquering army, their leader a thin man with pale eyes and an undertaker's smile. He dismounted in front of the sheriff's office where Luke waited, Annabeth at his side despite his protests. "Luke Rollins," the marshal asked, though clearly he knew the answer. "I am Marshal Josiah Crane. I have a warrant for your arrest." He produced a folded paper with official seals. "For the murders of James, William, and Carl Henderson in Arizona Territory. Those men murdered my family," Luke said evenly. "And that was 5 years ago. Why now?" Crane's smile was cold. "Justice has no statute of limitations. Mr. Rollins, you're to come with us to stand trial in Tucson. Like hell." Annabeth stepped forward. "Daniel Henderson himself forgave that debt. We have witnesses. Daniel Henderson has no legal standing to forgive murders committed in Arizona." Crane interrupted. "The territorial governor wants this matter resolved. Too many men taking the law into their own hands lately. Time to make an example." Luke studied the marshals, reading the situation with the instincts that had kept him alive. "This isn't about justice? Someone's pulling strings? Who?" "I enforce the law. Rollins, not question it." Crane's hand rested on his pistol. "You can come peaceful or otherwise. Your choice. And my wife? No charges against her. She's free to go." Annabeth gripped Luke's arm. "We'll fight this. Get a lawyer. Gather witnesses." "With what judge?" Luke's voice was bitter. "What jury? You think I'll get a fair trial in Tucson?" He turned to her, and she saw the resignation in his eyes. "They'll hang me, Annabeth, legal and proper, but the result's the same. Then we run." "Like before?" "No." He cupped her face gently. "No more running. You deserve better than life as a fugitive's wife." "I deserve you," she said fiercely. "Nothing else matters." Marshal Crane cleared his throat. "Touching scene, but I've got a job to do. Rollins, you coming or do my boys earn their pay today?" The other marshals had spread out, hands ready. The townspeople watched from windows and doorways. but none would interfere with federal law. Luke looked at them, at Sheriff Walsh, who stood helpless, at Ma Holloway wringing her hands on the boarding house porch. "I'll come," he said finally. "But I need a moment with my wife. Private." Crane considered, then nodded. 5 minutes. Don't try anything stupid." Luke led Annabeth into the sheriff's office, closing the door on watching eyes. The moment they were alone, he pulled her close, kissing her with desperate intensity. "Listen," he said urgently. "There's another pouch hidden in our room, beneath the loose floorboard. Take it. Take buttermilk, and go to the Apache reservation north of here. Find a man named Joseph Crow Feather. Tell him I sent you, that you need sanctuary. He owes me from years back." "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." His voice was iron. "Because if you don't, if you try to follow, they'll use you against me. Threaten you to make me compliant. I can face whatever comes, but not if you're in danger." "Luke, please." He kissed her again, softer this time. "This isn't goodbye. I'll find a way back to you. I swear it. But I need you safe." He pulled back, memorizing her face. "Be strong, my Canyon wife, for both of us." Before she could protest further, he opened the door. "Marshal, I'm ready." They shackled him like a common criminal. Annabeth watched, fists clenched, as they loaded him into a prison wagon they'd brought for the purpose. Luke's eyes found hers one last time, a world of love and regret in that gray gaze. "I'll hire lawyers," she called as the wagon rolled away. "The best money can buy. This isn't over." But Marshal Crane just touched his hat mockingly, and then they were gone, leaving dust and devastation in their wake. Annabeth stood frozen in the street until Ma Holloway's gentle hands guided her inside. "Come, dear." Nothing to be done standing there. "They took him," Annabeth said numbly. "Just took him, like none of it mattered. Our life, our plans." "I know, dear, I know." Sheriff Walsh appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Rollins, I'm sorry. If they'd been regular lawmen, maybe I could have. But federal marshals?" He shook his head. "Your husband's right about one thing. Someone with power wants him bad. This smells of politics." "Then I'll fight politics with politics." Annabeth straightened, pushing grief aside. "Who's the best lawyer between here and Tucson?" "That'd be Hamilton Pierce in Prescott. But ma'am, he's expensive, and he doesn't take cases he can't win." "He'll take this one." She was already moving, planning. "Ma Holloway, I'll need my things. Sheriff, can you recommend trustworthy men to escort me to Prescott? I'll pay well. You're not going to the reservation like your husband asked?" Annabeth's smile was sharp as broken glass. "My husband wants me safe, but he married a fighter, not a runner. I'll be damned if I let them hang him without raising hell from here to Washington." She left Sage Creek that afternoon with 2 of Walsh's deputies as escorts. The journey to Prescott took 3 days of hard riding. Annabeth used the time to plan, to remember every detail that might help. By the time she reached Hamilton Pierce's office, she had her arguments marshaled like an army. Pierce was a distinguished man in his 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. He listened to her story without interruption, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The Henderson brothers' murder is well documented," he said finally. "Your husband made no secret of it. Hard to defend a confessed killer, Mrs. Rollins. He killed the men who murdered his family. When the law did nothing, vigilante justice is still illegal. Is it justice when the law protects murderers because they're rich?" Annabeth leaned forward. "Mr. Pierce, I'm not asking you to pretend my husband is innocent. I'm asking you to make sure he gets a fair trial. To ask why, after 5 years, suddenly there's interest in prosecuting him. To find out who's really behind this." Pierce studied her. "You suspect conspiracy?" "I know it. This started when we stopped running. When we tried to build a legal life. Someone didn't want that." "Interesting." Pierce opened a drawer, pulling out paper. "Tell me everything. Every detail about the Henderson killings. About your life since, about Marshal Crane. Leave nothing out." Annabeth talked until her throat was raw. Pierce took notes, occasionally asking pointed questions. When she finished, he sat back, tapping his pen thoughtfully. There are irregularities, he admitted. The timing, the federal involvement in what should be a territorial matter, and this Marshall Crane. He frowned. I've heard that name, not in connection with law enforcement. Will you take the case? It'll be expensive and dangerous. Whoever's behind this has reach. I have money, and I'm not afraid of danger. Pierce smiled slightly. No, I can see that. All right, Mrs. Rollins, I'll take your case. But understand, the best I might achieve is life imprisonment instead of hanging. Then you'll have to do better than your best. Pierce left for Tucson immediately, promising to send word as soon as he learned anything. Annabeth took a room at Prescott's best hotel, pacing like a caged cat. 3 days passed before a telegram arrived. At trial set for next week. Stop prosecution rushing. Stop Judge Harlan presiding. Stop man has reputation for harsh sentences. Stop come immediately. Stop Pierce. Annabeth was on the next stage to Tucson. The city was larger than she expected. Adobe buildings baking under the desert sun. Pierce met her at the stage depot, his expression grim. It's worse than I thought, he said without preamble. Judge Harlan's in someone's pocket. The jury pool's been contaminated. And your husband, he paused. They're keeping him isolated. No visitors, including lawyers. I've filed protests, but take me to the jail. Mrs. Rollins, I just said, take me anyway. The jail was a squat building of thick adobe, windows barred and narrow. The deputy at the desk didn't even look up when they entered. No visitors for Rollins, he said automatically. I'm his attorney. Pierce began. No visitors means no visitors. Annabeth stepped forward. Then perhaps you can deliver a message. Tell him his wife is here. Tell him... Her voice caught. Tell him the canyon is waiting. The deputy finally looked up, something flickering in his eyes. I'll tell him. Don't mean he'll hear it. Outside, Annabeth turned to Pierce. What aren't you telling me? The lawyer hesitated. There are rumors that your husband's been questioned. Roughly, that they're trying to force a confession that includes other names, make him implicate others in exchange for leniency. He won't break. Every man breaks eventually. Mrs. Rollins, the question is what they want him to say. That night, alone in her hotel room, Annabeth allowed herself to cry. Somewhere in this city, Luke was suffering, and she couldn't reach him. The law that should protect was being used as a weapon. Everything they'd built was crumbling. But with dawn came determination. She dressed carefully, presenting herself as a respectable widow rather than the wild woman she'd become. Then she began her campaign. She visited every newspaper office in Tucson, telling her story to anyone who'd listen. Most dismissed her, but one young reporter, eager for a story that might make his name, took interest. A love story sells papers, he said. Beautiful woman fighting for her man. The tragedy of it. Give me details. Mrs. Rollins. Make the readers weep. Annabeth swallowed her pride and gave him what he wanted. The story ran the next day. Canyon bride fights for tracker's life. It was sensational, exaggerated, but it sparked interest. Pierce, meanwhile, had uncovered disturbing connections. Marshall Crane has ties to the Copper Crown Mining Company. They've been buying up land rights all through the territory. And guess where the Henderson family holdings were located? Near mineral deposits? Rich ones. That Daniel Henderson now controls. But if he were implicated in conspiracy, if your husband testified that Henderson paid him to kill his brothers, the land would be contested. Maybe available for purchase. Annabeth felt sick. This isn't about justice at all. It rarely is. Pierce gathered his papers. But now we have ammunition. The question is whether Judge Harlan will let us use it. The trial began on a scorching Tuesday. The courthouse was packed, partly due to the newspaper stories Annabeth had cultivated. She sat in the front row, wearing the blue dress from her wedding, her presence a silent statement. When they brought Luke in, She bit back a cry. He was thinner, marked by rough treatment, but his head was high. His eyes found hers immediately, and she saw something kindle there. Hope, perhaps, or just love surviving despite everything. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Luke Rollins had hunted and killed 3 men. He'd confessed to it publicly. The law was clear. But when Pierce rose for the defense, he painted a different picture. A family murdered while the law looked away. A brother seeking the only justice available. And now, years later, mysterious forces seeking to use that tragedy for profit. I call Mrs. Annabeth Rollins to the stand. Annabeth had insisted on testifying despite Pierce's reservations. She took the oath with steady hands, meeting the hostile gaze of the prosecutor without flinching. She told their story simply, honestly. The woman rejected for her barrenness who found love with a man rejected by society. Their life in the canyon. Their attempt to build something legitimate in Sage Creek. The arrival of the marshals just when they'd found peace. "Do you believe your husband is a murderer?" the prosecutor asked on cross-examination. "I believe he's a man who sought justice when the law failed. If that makes him a murderer, then the law that failed is equally guilty." "That's not how justice works, Mrs. Rollins." "Then how does it work?" She leaned forward. "When rich men can kill a family for water rights and face no consequences? When federal marshals appear 5 years later only when mining interests are at stake? Is that justice?" "Objection." The prosecutor called. "The witness is making speeches." Sustained. Judge Harlan said coldly, "The jury will disregard." But Annabeth saw the jurors' faces. Some were thoughtful now, questioning. She'd planted the seed of doubt. The trial continued for 3 days. Pierce fought brilliantly, bringing in witnesses from Sage Creek, even managing to get Daniel Henderson's written statement admitted. But Judge Harlan blocked him at every turn, sustaining every prosecution objection, denying crucial defense motions. On the final day, Luke was allowed to speak. He stood tall despite his shackles, voice clear and strong. "I killed those men," he said. "I'll not deny it. They murdered my family, and I took vengeance. If that damns me, so be it, but I'll not lie for anyone's profit. I'll not implicate innocent men for promises of mercy. If you hang me for the truth, not for lies that serve rich men's greed." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Annabeth sat frozen, Pierce's hand on her arm, the only thing keeping her grounded. When they filed back in, she read the verdict in their faces before they spoke. Guilty. The word hit like a physical blow, but Luke's eyes never left hers, and she saw him mouth the words, "Be strong." Judge Harlan pronounced sentence with obvious satisfaction. "Luke Rollins, you are condemned to hang by the neck until dead, sentenced to be carried out 1 week hence." The courtroom erupted. Annabeth surged to her feet, but Pierce held her back. "Not here," he hissed. "We'll appeal. There's no time." She wrenched free, pushing through the crowd. "Luke!" He turned at her voice, and for a moment the guards let them come together. She gripped his shackled hands, memorizing his face. "I'll find a way," she promised. "I won't let them do this. Live," he said urgently. "Whatever happens, you live. Find happiness. My happiness is you fool." She kissed him desperately, tasting tears and determination. "I'll find a way." The guards pulled them apart, dragging Luke back to his cell. Annabeth stood in the emptying courtroom, Pierce beside her, plotting desperately. "Appeal will take months," Pierce said. "We don't have? Then we don't use the law." Annabeth's voice was steel. "You've done what you could, Mr. Pierce. Thank you, but now I do this my way." She left before he could protest, mind racing. The law had failed them. Justice was a lie sold to the highest bidder. But Luke had taught her other lessons. Sometimes, to protect what you love, you had to work outside the lines drawn by proper society. That night, she sat in her hotel room, planning. She had money, determination, and nothing left to lose. They wanted to hang her husband for seeking justice? Then she'd show them what a woman with nothing to lose could do. She thought of their canyon, of wild kisses and wilder dreams, of the life they'd built and the future they'd planned. They'd taken all that. These men with their laws and their greed. Annabeth smiled grimly, loading the pistol Luke had taught her to use. They'd forgotten one thing in their calculations. They'd made her a widow before her time, taken the only thing that mattered. Hell hath no fury. Indeed, the week wasn't over yet. The night before the scheduled hanging, Annabeth sat in a small adobe house on the outskirts of Tucson, surrounded by the most unlikely group of allies. Joseph Crowfeather, the Apache Luke had told her to find, studied the jail's layout she'd sketched. Beside him sat two of his nephews, young warriors eager to repay the debt their family owed Luke. Ma Holloway had arrived that afternoon with Sheriff Walsh and 3 men from Sage Creek, all armed and determined. "The jail's too well guarded," Walsh said, shaking his head. 8 deputies at night, plus the marshal's men. It's a fortress. Every fortress has weakness, Joseph said quietly. His English was accented but clear. "Luke Rollins saved my daughter from slavers. This debt must be paid." "It's not about debt," Annabeth said. "It's about justice, real justice, not what they're selling in that courthouse." She'd spent 5 days preparing, using Henderson's money to gather supplies and allies. The young reporter who'd written her story had provided crucial information about guard rotations. A Mexican woman whose son Luke had once helped getting away from rustlers offered her cousins as additional men. Even Hamilton Pierce, while officially withdrawing from anything illegal, had quietly provided details about the jail's construction. "They'll move him at dawn," Annabeth continued. "From the jail to the scaffold they've built in the plaza, that's our best chance during the transfer." "Too public," one of the Sage Creek men protested. "Dozens of witnesses, maybe hundreds." "Exactly." Annabeth smiled grimly. "They want a spectacle? We'll give them one they'll never forget." She outlined her plan. It was audacious, relying on precision timing and the chaos of crowds. Some of the men looked skeptical, but Joseph nodded slowly. "The woman thinks like Apache," he said approvingly. "Strike where they do not expect. Use their strength against them." "It's dangerous," Walsh warned. "We'll all be outlaws after this. I'm already a dead woman walking." Annabeth replied, "They took my husband, my future, my hope for a legal life. What else can they take?" "Your life," Ma Holloway said gently. "Without Luke, that's not worth much anyway." They spent the night in final preparations. Annabeth changed into men's clothing, easier to move, to fight if necessary. She strapped on the gun belt Luke had given her, checked her rifle, tucked a knife into her boot. The woman who'd stood in white at a Cedar Falls altar was gone completely. In her place stood someone harder, wilder, forged by loss and love. As dawn approached, they took their positions. Joseph and his nephews melted into the shadows near the jail. The Sage Creek men positioned themselves along the route to the plaza. Ma Holloway, playing the role of concerned citizen, stood near the scaffold itself with several of the Mexican cousins dressed as mourning women. Annabeth waited on a rooftop overlooking the main street, rifle ready. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Luke had taught her well. The sun rose blood red over the desert, and the town began to stir. Citizens gathered for the hanging, some somber, some excited by the spectacle. Vendors sold food and drink as if it were a festival. The scaffold stood ready, rope swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Then the jail doors opened. Luke emerged between 6 guards, hands shackled, chains on his ankles, but he walked upright, unbowed. His eyes swept the crowd, searching, and found Annabeth on a rooftop. For just a moment, his lips quirked in what might have been a smile. Marshal Crane led the procession, chest puffed with importance. Behind the main group, more deputies flanked the street, rifles ready. They were taking no chances. Halfway to the plaza, Joseph struck. A smoke bomb, something from his army days, erupted beneath the marshal's horse. The animal reared, screaming, throwing Crane into the dust. More smoke bombs followed, turning the street into chaos. Citizens scattered, women screamed, Vendors abandoned their wares. The Sage Creek men opened fire from cover, not aiming to kill but to sow confusion. Deputies dove for shelter, unable to tell where the shots originated. In the smoke and panic, 2 Apache warriors materialized beside Luke, knives flashing. His shackles fell away. "No!" Crane screamed from the ground. "Stop them! Shoot Rollins!" But Luke was already moving, the warriors flanking him. They'd brought a horse, his own gray Mustang, somehow retrieved from the jail's stables. He vaulted into the saddle with his old grace, and Annabeth's heart soared. A deputy raised his rifle, drawing a bead on Luke's back. Annabeth's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him down. She worked the lever, fired again, keeping heads down as Luke galloped toward her position. "Jump!" he yelled as he passed beneath. She didn't hesitate, dropped the rifle, took 3 running steps, and leaped. For a terrifying moment, she was airborne. Then Luke's strong arm caught her, swinging her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling his solid warmth. Alive and free. "Took you long enough," she said into his ear. His laugh was wild as the Mustang's run. "Had to make it dramatic. You always did like a scene." Bullets whined past, but they were already beyond effective range. The other rescuers were scattering according to plan, melting into the desert by different routes. They'd rendezvous later at a predetermined canyon, but for now it was just Luke and Annabeth and the thundering horse beneath them. They rode hard for an hour before Luke slowed, turning off the main trail onto a barely visible path. The Mustang picked its way through a maze of rocks, finally emerging in a hidden wash where Joseph waited with fresh horses and supplies. "Brother," the Apache greeted Luke formally. "The debt is paid." "More than paid," Luke replied, dismounting and helping Annabeth down. "We're grateful. Your woman has the heart of a warrior." Joseph smiled slightly. "When she found me, I thought, this little white woman wants to fight the entire government, but she spoke of you with such fire, such determination. I knew the spirits had chosen her for you." "They chose well," Luke said, pulling Annabeth close. Joseph left them with the supplies and good wishes, promising to lay false trails for the pursuit. Luke and Annabeth switched to the fresh horses, including faithful Buttermilk, and continued north. As they rode, Luke told her about his imprisonment, the beatings, the attempts to make him implicate others, the growing certainty that he would die. "Then your message came. The canyon is waiting. I knew you wouldn't give up." "Never," Annabeth said fiercely. "They could hang us both before I'd give up on you." They traveled for 3 days, using Luke's knowledge of the territory to evade pursuit. On the 4th dawn, they stood on a ridge looking down into a familiar canyon. Not their first, but another hidden place Luke knew. "We can't go back to Sage Creek," he said quietly. "Can't put those people at risk. And they'll hunt us harder now. I'm not just a killer anymore. I'm an escaped, condemned man." "I know." Annabeth dismounted, standing beside him. "I've been thinking about that. And Joseph's people talked about Canada. Said there's good land up north, places where American law doesn't reach. We could start over, again." Luke was quiet for a moment. "That's a hard journey. Months of travel, maybe more, and no guarantee they wouldn't follow even there. Then we keep going. Alaska, maybe. Or take ship to somewhere they'd never think to look." She took his hand. "I don't care where we go. Luke, I just care that we're together." He turned to her, and she saw the weight he carried. "You gave up everything for me. Your family, your respectability, any chance at a normal life. Now you're an outlaw too." "I gained everything," she corrected. "Love, adventure, freedom, the chance to live as myself, not as what others expected." She reached up to touch his face, thumb tracing the familiar scar. "I regret nothing except the time we'd lost. My wild canyon wife." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the sun paint the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. "All right, north it is. But first, we find one of those Mexican padres who doesn't ask too many questions. I want to marry you again, under our new names. Make it real for wherever we end up." Annabeth laughed. the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "Luke Rawlins, are you proposing to me again?" "Seems I am, though it might be Jake Miller or Tom Watson proposing, depending on what names we choose. And I might be Sarah Jones or Mary Brown accepting. Don't care what names we use," Luke said seriously. "You'll always be my Annabeth, my salvation, my home." They made camp in the canyon that night, building a small fire, cooking simple food. As darkness fell, they made love under the stars, rechristening their freedom with passion. Later, wrapped in blankets, they planned their future. "We'll need to split up from the others soon," Luke said. "They've risked enough for us. Ma Holloway wants to come north, says she's tired of the territories, wants to see snow again before she dies. Good woman, she'll be welcome." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry you can't have the life you deserved. House, children, respectability." "Stop." Annabeth sat up, facing him in the firelight. "I have exactly the life I deserve. The life I chose. Yes, I grieve the children I'll never bear. But look what I have instead. A love most people never find. Adventures they couldn't imagine. Freedom they wouldn't dare claim. No regrets. Only one." She smiled. "That we wasted so much time being afraid. Of the past, the future, what others would think. No more fear. Luke, whatever comes, we face it. Together. Always together." They resumed traveling at dawn, meeting their scattered allies at the designated canyon. Sheriff Walsh had news. The territory was in uproar over the escape. Marshal Crane was demanding federal troops to hunt them, but there were also rumblings of investigation into the trial itself. Questions about the mining company's involvement. "Pierce is making noise in the newspapers," Walsh reported. "Says the whole thing stinks of corruption. Might not help you directly, but it's making them careful." "Good," Annabeth said. "Let them explain why they were so eager to hang a man for 5-year-old killings." They spent one last night together, the whole group. Ma Holloway cooked a farewell feast with their limited supplies. The Sage Creek men shared whiskey and stories. Even the usually stoic Apache warriors smiled at the camaraderie. In the morning, they parted ways. Most would return south, to resume their lives and claim ignorance of the rescue. Ma Holloway would follow Luke and Annabeth north, but by a different route to confuse pursuit. Joseph Crow. Feather clasped Luke's hand in farewell. "The spirits say your path leads to snow and pine," he said. "Trust the journey." Luke and Annabeth rode north through landscapes that changed from desert to grassland to mountain. They were chased twice, once by a cavalry patrol that lost them in a sandstorm, once by bounty hunters who turned back when the trail led into Comanche territory. Each escape bound them closer, proved their partnership. They were married again in a tiny mission in Colorado, the elderly priest either not recognizing or not caring about their identities. Annabeth wore wildflowers in her hair. Luke had found her a simple gold band from somewhere. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, she felt the last chains of her old life fall away. They crossed into Wyoming as autumn touched the mountains. The aspens turned gold, reminding Annabeth of that first canyon where they'd found each other. They trapped and hunted for supplies, traded with Indians and mountain men who asked no questions. Slowly, carefully, they made their way toward the Canadian border. Winter caught them in Montana, but they'd found shelter with a group of Métis traders who welcomed them warmly. Annabeth learned to work with furs, to cook with limited ingredients, to survive blizzards that would have killed her former self. Luke's reputation as a tracker earned them respect and friendship. When spring came, they crossed into Canada near a place called Writing on Stone. The border was unmarked, unguarded, but Annabeth felt the difference. American law stopped here. They were truly free. They settled finally in the foothills of the Rockies, in a valley that reminded Luke of their first canyon, built a cabin with their own hands, raised horses trapped in winter and guided hunters in summer. Ma Holloway joined them that fall, bringing news that Marshal Crane had been indicted for corruption. that the Copper Crown Mining Company was under investigation. Might be safe to go back someday, she suggested over dinner. Luke and Annabeth exchanged glances. Go back to what? The life they'd built here was richer than anything they'd left behind. They had work, purpose, friends among the local tribes and settlements. They had each other. We are home, Annabeth said simply. Years passed. The cabin grew into a proper house. They couldn't have children of their own, but became unofficial parents to every stray that found their valley. Indian orphans, runaway settlers' kids, anyone who needed shelter and wasn't particular about the law. Annabeth taught them letters and numbers. Luke taught them to survive on the land. Their family grew in unexpected ways, sometimes on quiet evenings. Annabeth thought about that morning in Cedar Falls when her life shattered. The girl in the white dress could never have imagined this future, teaching a Blackfoot boy to read by candlelight while Luke carved toys for the younger children. Ma Holloway telling stories by the fire. Do you ever think about going back? Luke asked one night, finding her on the porch watching northern lights dance across the sky. Back where? The States. Your family. You're my family. This is my home. She leaned into his warmth. That girl, that life, she died in the desert. What rose from her ashes was better, stronger, truer. My phoenix, he murmured into her hair. Your wife, she corrected. Forever and always. The northern lights painted the snow in shades of green and gold, and somewhere in the distance, wolves sang to the moon. Annabeth thought of their first canyon, of wild kisses and desperate love. They'd come so far from that place, yet in the ways that mattered, they'd never left. Home wasn't a location. It was what they built together, what they chose each day to protect and nurture. She was Annabeth Rollins, wife of the canyon, mother to the lost, teacher to the willing. She'd been rejected for her barrenness and found abundance, been cast out and discovered freedom, lost everything society said mattered and gained what actually did. The silent tracker had taken her to the canyon of wild kisses, but love had taken them both somewhere better, home. As the lights danced and Luke held her close, Annabeth smiled. Let the proper people have their proper lives. She'd take this wild, precious existence every time. She'd take love over propriety, choice over convention, freedom over safety. She'd take Luke and the life they'd built from ashes, forever and always. The story of the barren woman and the tracker had become legend in the territories, told around campfires and in saloons. But the truth was simpler and more beautiful. Two broken people had found each other and discovered they were whole together. In the end, that was the only story that mattered. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this wild journey through the canyons and territories of the Old West. I hope Annabeth and Luke's story touched your heart as it did mine. I'm curious, where are you listening to this tale? Are you driving through your own desert highways, cozied up at home, or perhaps on a long journey of your own? Please share in the comments below where in the world this story has reached you. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more passionate tales of love and adventure from America's frontier days. And please, share your thoughts about Annabeth and Luke's journey. Did their love story move you? What was your favorite moment? Until we meet again on the dusty trails of the Wild West, keep your hearts wild and your spirits free.